woman will conceive and bear a child, and so on. Um, in the days of Ahaz, son of Jotam, son of Uzziah, you might have Jotham in your Bibles there, but whenever there's a J in the Old Testament, it's really a Y. For some reason, we've chosen to use the Latin spellings, and Latin phoneme y is a J. And so it should be a Y, so I changed those. The days of Ahaz, son of Jotam, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and King Pekah, son of Remaliah of Israel, went up to attack Jerusalem, but could not mount an attack against it. All right, just a couple of comments here. Aram has several kingdoms in it, the most famous one of which is Damascus. And so we're dealing with Damascus here. There are three terms that we use for Aram: Aram, Syria, and Damascus. And then King Pekah is a usurper. So we're going to talk about him a little bit later. They could not mount this attack. They weren't successful. When the house of David, and that's the formal name of Judah, by the way, in the ancient world. We now have two very famous inscriptions are written using the title House of David to indicate the nation Judah. It also refers to the court of the king in Jerusalem. When the house of David heard that Aram had allied itself with Ephraim, Ephraim is another name for northern Israel, whose capital city was Samaria. The heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind, reminds us of quaking aspen. Then, and I've tried to change this, but for some reason it doesn't want to. When you see the word Lord in all caps, it's the personal name of God, Yahweh. So I always substitute that name there. It seems strange to say the Lord, he is our God. Lord is just a title. So really what they're saying is Yahweh, he is our God. That's a specific identification. So Yahweh said to Isaiah, go out to meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear-Yashub, which means a remnant will abide or will remain at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field. After today's talk, you'll be able to localize those things and say to him, take heed, be quiet, do not fear. What does be quiet? Don't speak? That doesn't make any sense. Actually, what it indicates is, like in Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. It doesn't mean be reverent in the sanctuary. It means don't do anything. Just sit back and watch God do his thing. He's the divine warrior. He battles for his people. He's the general of the heavenly armies. The Yahweh Tsevaot, the Lord of hosts, we translate in English usually, but that was his formal title in the Jerusalem temple, Yahweh Tsevaot. In A Mighty Fortress is Our God, that hymn by Martin Luther, the Lord Sabaoth, we often see, and we often understand it to mean Sabbath. It's not that, it's the translation, a bad translation of this word Tsevaot, or hosts or armies, literally. So don't fear, Yahweh is going to do his thing. Do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands. Prophets, especially Isaiah, well, and others too, love to sneer at their enemies. Don't fear these people because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram. And then I like to translate this last one. Notice that the name Pekah does not occur here. Instead, it's his father's name. And we should understand it as that son of Remaliah. Again, he's sneering here. Pekah was a usurper and Remaliah was a commoner. And so he's just, he's a nothing. He is. Okay. A little bit, I heard Jean's presentation a few weeks ago, and so I will refer to her talk a little bit now and then. And I don't want to go over again what she did, but just a few specifics here. Isaiah flourished from about 742, the last year of King Uzziah, through Kings Jotam, Ahaz, and Hezekiah to about 690. So he was active for a long time. His call is in chapter 6 of Isaiah. Again, these chapters are not in any kind of order. They put them together, not in chronological order, that's what I should say. He was a contemporary of Micah and Hosea in the last part of the 8th century BC. By the way, I'll be having dates here with no BC markers because they're all going to be BC. As I once heard an archaeological guide say, all these years are before BC. So that's what the case is here too. So he's slightly later than Amos, who was the earliest of the writing prophets. And like most prophets, Isaiah's oracles follow the types, themes, and patterns of Amos. Amos set the trend for almost all the later writing prophets. Isaiah, whose Hebrew name would have been pronounced something like Yeshayahu, Yahweh saves. It's a name which embodies the essence of his message, trust in God. The Assyrian Empire, not Syrian, but Assyrian, right, with an A. The Assyrian Empire was the superpower at this time, with their capital city at Nineveh. Their main god, and the eponymous god, we call it because it's the one that is the basis of the name of the nation Assyria, was the god Ashur. Assyria was the largest empire in the world until the Persian Empire, which it was almost as big as the Roman Empire. The Persian Empire was a stretch from China to Greece. And it waxed and waned, the Assyrian Empire did, for hundreds of years. There are periods when it's very prosperous and controlled a lot of territory, others when it was quite weak. When Assyria was weak, the small nations of our region, we call that the southern Levant. The Levant is the eastern Mediterranean. These small nations fought against each other as repeatedly as recounted in 2 Kings. But when Assyria was strong and threatening them, they put their quarrels to the side and made alliances to stand up to this evil empire. Such as the attempt in Isaiah 7, which we'll talk about below. These small nations included the Aramean states, Damascus, Aleppo, and others, Israel, capital city Samaria, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Phoenician city-states like Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and the Philistine city-states, the Pentapolis of the Philistines, and the Cushite dynasty of Egypt. The Cushites were from today Sudan, dynasty 26. They were the ones who came and helped to rescue Hezekiah later on. Israel was one of the strongest of these small nations. At the great battle of Karkar against Assyria in 853, Ahab had more than 2,000 chariots. These are listed by Shalmaneser III, the king, the Assyrian king, whom these nations were fighting against. So it's not Ahab himself saying he had 2,000 chariots. This is the Assyrians. These were more than all the other small nations, allied nations put together. So Ahab was very prosperous. We have to see him perhaps as the most prosperous of the northern Israelite kings. I need another lecture to illustrate that. Judah actually had two capital cities. Jerusalem is the most famous one. You might say this is a three-season capital. It's in the highlands, and its climate is almost perfect. And then during the winter, when Jerusalem can have snow and foul, cold, windy, damp weather that goes to your bones, They moved the court down to the city called Lachish. Gene talked about Lachish a little bit. We're going to talk quite a bit about it here today. That was the winter capital in the lowlands, only about 300 feet above sea level or so, whereas Jerusalem is almost 3,000 feet above sea level. And in fact, the Bible talks about an assassination of one of the Judean kings that occurred there at Lachish. We will in fact see the foundations of the palace there at Lachish. Okay, just a little bit about Isaiah. Jean talked about this a little bit too. She did it quite quickly. I want to emphasize the differences between these so-called three Isaiahs. Adventists have traditionally not liked to talk about three Isaiahs. I suppose because it's all included within the title Isaiah, but there's really no reason to see this book as having to be written by just one person. First Isaiah, we call the historical prophet, chapters 1 through 39, minus 24 through 27, which is we call the little apocalypse. It dates to the late 8th to early 7th century, and it deals with historical events, such as his prophetic call, the Syro-Ephraimite War, which we will talk about later in Isaiah 7 and 2 Kings 16. Its oracular theme, Isaiah's oracles, centered around the fact that God will protect his people. There's no need to trust earthly powers. The writings are both prose and poetry. In the poetry, we have polysemy. Polysemy means multiple ways of interpreting something. For instance, in chapter 118, the famous verse, though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow, right? Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. Well, you can make that into a rhetorical question as well. The word is not though, the word is if. If your sins be as scarlet, will they be white as snow? Of course not, is the idea. Actually, both meanings can make sense in the context, which is a covenant lawsuit. And again, that's another lecture, what covenants and covenant lawsuits are. Second Isaiah, we call the literary prophet, chapters 40 through 55. These chapters assume Judah in Babylonian exile. Scholars use a form of criticism, we call it, called Sitz im Leben, German term, your seat in life. All of us look at things differently because we have a different seat in life. If I'm male or if I'm female, it's different. If I'm American or if I'm European, it's different, and so on. That's a Sitz im Leben. If you look at the way people write or speak, well, right now I'm speaking to a group of educated Seventh-day Adventists, all right? I'm not speaking to kindergartners or elementary school people. If I'm doing that, I speak in a different way. And so what we do, we analyze books and literature in terms of what the writer is trying to say, what he is assuming about his audience. That's the Sitz im Leben. And so we date, because it's Babylonian exile, we date it to the 6th century. This is extremely elegant poetry, meant to comfort a suffering people who are away from their homeland. It's full of complex literary devices with heavy use of polysemy, sometimes not just 2 alternate meanings, but 3. And most of the messianic oracles are here, such as Isaiah 53. Third Isaiah, this we call the proto-apocalyptic prophet. Apocalyptic literature arose out of the prophets, and the Old Testament prophets are moving slightly in that direction when they are post-exilic. And so we include chapters 24 through 27 and 56 through 66, and we date it to the late 6th or 5th century. This expands Second Isaiah's themes of hope, with grand poetry about the new age, which Christian apocalyptic literature turned into heaven. Okay. The Bible describes, well, this is Assyria and Israel and Judah combined. The Bible describes the relationship between Israel and Judah as antagonistic. We often think of them as brothers, but they didn't like each other for the most part. Many Assyrian sources describe Israel and Judah, often in descriptions of battles or lists of tribute. I'm talking about sources that we have now. They did not like Assyria. Assyria is depicted as mean, nasty, and horrible. But the Assyrians also fostered a stable world, something we archaeologists are beginning to call a Pax Assyriaca, okay, not Pax, Pax Roman, the Roman peace. This is the Assyrian peace. Because of their empire, they were able to foster not just peace and stability, but also economical prosperity. For instance, they facilitated a huge olive oil industry at the Philistine city of Ekron. And here in this picture, we see a reconstruction of one of approximately 104 cottage or household industries for producing olive oil. I don't want to go into a lot of the detail here, but they would put olives, crushed olives, they would crush them in the basin right here, put them into baskets under this beam, and then lift the beam up, attach over those baskets, and attach these weights to the beams, and they would push down on the baskets, and the oil would come out into a carved out space below in the rock here. There's another one over here. There were about 104 of these in Ekron itself. Now, around Ekron, they could not produce olive trees. It was too low in altitude. They needed to get the olives from up higher in the highlands. And so massive caravans bringing olives down to this region, producing the oil, and then international trade fostered by the Assyrian Empire. Okay, I want to start a little bit chronologically with Israel's dealings with Assyria. Assyria hangs over almost all of First Isaiah. Okay, this is a picture of Samaria, the hill that you see behind in the next valley over, this hill right here. That's Samaria from the north. There's a highway here. The Second Kings talks about many escapades between Samaria and Assyria, and Samaria and Syria or Damascus as well. Tiglath-Pileser was the king in 733 or 34 or so, when Samaria had allied with Damascus to go against Jerusalem. The ruins of the temple built by King Ahab, it was Ahab's father who bought the hill of Samaria and began building his capital there, but he only lasted a few years, and Ahab followed him. We see these nicely cut stones in the wall here. They indicate at this time in history, the 9th century, they nicely cut stones called ashlar masonry indicate royal buildings. And so this is part of the royal palace. It's this area right in here that the palace was. All around the palace, and a huge courtyard in front where military groups could be called up and so on. All around were storerooms and storehouses, very important inscriptions found in this storehouse right here. So a large area. You see, this is what, about, what does it say down there? 50 meters, this measuring device is. So It's about the length of 2 football fields and about the width of 1. On the black obelisk, which was made by the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III in the mid-9th century, it's made of black limestone. It shows the Israelite king bowing down to Shalmaneser III right here, with eunuchs on either side. You can usually tell eunuchs in ancient art because they're clean shaven. Often they're a little portly. But eunuchs are very prominent in royal scenes all the way from the 9th century down through Persian times in the 4th century. But he's bringing tribute to Shalmaneser III. I suggest that this is Jehoram. Many suggest Jehu, but Jehu lived a little bit late to be a contemporary of Shalmaneser III. So you see that the people of Israel, the nation Israel, frequently were subject to the Assyrians. Another indication of the relations, not very good ones, after Samaria was destroyed. No, I shouldn't. I begin with Amos 3, verse 14, where he's giving an oracle against Samaria. I will tear down the winter house. In the winter house, northern Israel had a winter palace too. That was at Jezreel, which is almost at sea level, going down towards the Jordan Valley. But Samaria was again high in the hills. So you go to the winter palace at Jezreel. I will tear down the winter house as well as the summer house, which was Samaria, and the houses of ivory shall perish, and the great houses shall come to an end, says Yahweh. Okay, houses of ivory. In the ruins of Nineveh and other Assyrian places where there were palaces, many Phoenician-style ivories have been found. Now, the Israelites were greatly influenced by Phoenician artists, and we have found hundreds of ivory fragments in Samaria itself, and they were all in this Phoenician style. And so these, which are also iconography that was in Israel and Judah for that matter, these 2 very frequent scenes. Cherub here on the left. A cherub was a composite beast, human head, animal body, eagle's wings. Here, lion's feet, but sometimes they're bull's feet. Cherubs were guardian deities. They're on thrones. They were on the Ark of the Covenant, on the walls of the temple. Make perfect sense. In fact, we found several temples in Syria with cherubs along the side. How do we know these are cherubs? There are a couple of them with inscriptions from Assyria, and this says this cherub. Can't get much more specific than that. Another theme that is frequent is the woman at the window in ivory. Women looked on the world from inside out, I guess. You can still see that actually in Islamic society in Cairo and North Africa. All right, I need to describe the background to the Syro-Ephraimite War, which is found as the basis of Isaiah 7 and its great prophecy of the young woman who will bear a child, or actually is bearing a child, and 2 Kings 16, which is describes the whole thing from a third person angle. In Isaiah 7, it's Isaiah's view of it. Okay, Ahaz is the king of Judah, and there is a threat of an Assyrian invasion that looms ominously on the horizon. And when that's the case, what do? The small nations form alliances. So when Assyria conquered a nation, they demanded a very high tribute and virtual enslavement. It is worse if they are forced to quell a rebellion too. So it's always risky to form these alliances. So what can the small nations do? they favored these alliances with the other small nations, and we have several battle accounts by the Assyrians of the small allied nations fighting them. One was that Battle of Karkar that we talked about earlier. In the Syro-Ephraimite War, Damascus, or Syria, and Israel, or Ephraim, have formed an alliance and are trying to pressure Judah to join that alliance. Sounds familiar to us too in the Gulf Wars and so on. Ahaz is actually caught between a rock and a hard place. What is better or worse? Option one, join the alliance of the small states in a rebellion that promises freedom from Assyrian oppression if victorious, but utter destruction and oppression if defeated, right? What a choice. Or option two, affirm loyalty to the Assyrian superpower, thus avoiding destruction, but you lose independence and become a vassal kingdom, paying annual tribute. No fun. In Isaiah 7, the allies threaten a siege of Jerusalem. This is what we call the Syro-Ephraimite War. It is then Damascus and Samaria, or Israel and Damascus, allied against Judah. Ahaz faces potential destruction by the allies, Aram and Israel, if they don't join, or possible destruction by the Assyrians if they do join. Not joining the alliance means, however, an alliance with Assyria. So there's all kinds of things to keep in mind. I want to show you that Ahaz was not a stupid renegade kind of king. He was forced with an extremely difficult decision. Ahaz's court is divided between these choices, but Isaiah, one of the courtiers, is an influential prophet, urges them to a third direction. Make no alliance, trust in God. But, observes Ahaz, one can't know about God. And anyway, Isaiah, you're just one. And most of the courts, if you take an example in Israel, Ahab had over 400 prophets in his court there in Samaria when Jehoshaphat came up to discuss an alliance against Damascus in 1 Kings 22. So they had many prophets, most likely. And Isaiah was one, and probably other prophets were saying other things. But Ahaz, with the safety of his nation at serious risk, just can't do nothing, right? He rejects Isaiah, even with the fulfillment of the sign in 7:14. And I don't want to get into all of that right now. Actually, point number 10 here, Warren Trenchard and I wrote an article in Spectrum in 2000 about this Syro-Ephraimite War, how we should understand Isaiah 7:14, and then how Matthew used that verse. So Ahaz actually solves the problem by allying with Assyria. In 2 Kings 16, which is the Syro-Ephraimite War chapter, verse 7, quote, Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, this is Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Aram and from the hand of the king of Israel, who are attacking me. So he calls on Assyria for help. Well, that's no good. Remember when the Maccabees called for help from Rome against the Seleucid Greek kingdom? Rome just took them over. Okay, what's going on here with Ahaz? And later we'll get into Hezekiah as well. Let's look at Jerusalem a little bit. This is an aerial picture from the south of Jerusalem. You see immediately the temple platform up here with the fantastic Dome of the Rock. and the Al-Aqsa Mosque here, the Wailing Wall area right here, massive archaeological excavations, most of them in the Byzantine and Roman periods. There's a huge excavation right now where this parking lot was in this picture. This is the spring, and the reason why Jerusalem is there. A spring came out here into the Kidron Valley, which stretches down like this, okay? This is what is called the City of David, and the village of Silwan over here. This spring is going to become important in all of this. This is, by the way, this is the palace area. David's palace, Solomon's palace, just south of the temple platform. Number 3 is where the pool of Siloam will ultimately be. This drawing represents the city at the in the early part of the reign of Hezekiah. The city of David, right here, the temple area here, the palace area here, okay? The spring here, Hezekiah, one of the first things he did was to enclose the spring in another wall right here with a gate, I call the water gate. The spring, you can see a little blue there, towers flanking it. This was actually outside the city at the beginning of Hezekiah's reign, and he brought it into the city by building this lower wall. Okay. Hezekiah knew that the Assyrians were going to come. They made an invasion in 701. Well, Hezekiah knew that was going to happen, so he did 2 primary things to prepare for this invasion. The first is on this page right here. In 2 Chronicles 32, when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib was the king of Assyria at that time, had come and intended to fight against Jerusalem. This would have been like 700, 699, or 700, 701, 702. He planned with his officers and his warriors to stop the flow of the springs. Okay, here's the spring right down here. Stop the flow, not just by building a wall, but he actually walled up the spring itself that were outside the city, and they helped him. A great many people were gathered, and they stopped all the springs and the wadi that flowed through the land, saying, why should the Assyrian kings come and find water in abundance? Probably what they're talking about here is this thing we archaeologists call the Siloam Channel right here. It was along the edge. If I go to the preceding one, it would have been from here, gone along something like this. It would have been outside the original wall, this wall right here, okay? And it had openings along the way to let water out and irrigate the fields in the Kidron Valley. Well, when they walled this spring up so that no water flowed down through here and could not be gotten by the Assyrian army, they dug an underground channel called Hezekiah's Tunnel, right here, Hezekiah's Tunnel, under the rock, well under the city. All of it is under. So there's no way the Assyrian army could have got it. And that led down to the Siloam Pool right here. And so in 2 Kings, we have a reference to this. The rest of the deeds of Hezekiah, all his power, how he made the pool and the conduit, okay, the pool and the conduit, and brought water into the city. See, it was inside the walls right here, right? Are they not written in the book of the Annals of the King of Judah? Yeah. So that's one thing that he did. Okay, this is the picture of Hezekiah's tunnel with my daughter-in-law in the picture. You can see it's wet up to mid-thigh or so. On a hot day in Jerusalem, this is what you want to do. You want to walk through Hezekiah's tunnel because it's so cool and nice. It takes about 45 minutes to walk through and enjoy. And you can see the tool marks. You can actually find the place because they dug this tunnel from both ends. I should mention, it snakes all around, probably because they were following fault lines in the hard limestone rock. Okay, they began at both ends, and they, as this inscription, which was found in the wall of the tunnel, talks about, they heard each other. They heard the ones coming from the left and the ones coming from the right. And you can tell where that took place because they are sort of fishing around looking for each other. The tunnel goes one direction, nope, corrects themselves, goes the other direction. And you can actually see where the tool marks come together going from both directions. The idea was to flow out to where just inside the city wall to the Pool of Siloam. Archaeologists have not found Hezekiah's Pool of Siloam. This is the one that's there recently and where most of the water still flows to. But there was a Roman Pool of Siloam with steps that led down. This is where Jesus healed the blind man. And where Jesus told him to go to the Pool of Siloam and wash his eyes out. The second thing that Hezekiah did in preparing for this invasion by Sennacherib was to, well, let me first of all say, when Samaria was destroyed, thousands of refugees undoubtedly fled south to Judah. And in fact, they camped on a hill to the west of the city of David. This is the city of David right here, Temple Mount up here, the Hezekiah's tunnel right here, the Siloam channel right there, Siloam pool down here. But they camped on this hill. The white line in this picture is the modern old city wall with its Muslim quarter, Christian quarter, Armenian quarter, and Jewish quarter. But Hezekiah needed to provide protection for this massive refugee camp, which tripled the city's population, actually. And so he built a huge wall. This is an incredible wall, which you see right here. Now compare it with these windows, which are normal sized house windows. This wall is 16 feet thick. Okay, lined with stones on each side and then filled with tightly packed rubble. He was preparing for something major, and it went all the way around, including a gateway right here. It's called the Broad Wall. If you ever visit Jerusalem, just ask for the Broad Wall. It's in the Jewish quarter. So this is the second thing that he did. And 2 Kings 22:14 talks about that. They went out and she resided in Jerusalem in the second or Mishnah quarter, where they consulted her. And we talk about this as the Mishnah quarter of Jerusalem then. So Mishnah quarter, city of David, Temple Mount, Old Testament regions of Jerusalem. Now I want to go to Lachish, where we can really see those nasty Assyrians. When people invaded Judah, often Babylon, this was the case with Babylon and Assyria both, they fought better with chariots. But chariots aren't good for highland, hilly terrain. What we're seeing here is low hills. The Judean hills, I don't know, yeah, can you see this little line right going along like that? That's the Judean hills in the east. And then Jerusalem, approximate location of Jerusalem is here. On this map, you can see Jerusalem here, Lachish down here. This is the ancient site, the top, the flat top with the sloping sides. Look how regular those sloping sides are. That's because they had a sloping rampart going up the sides, much like medieval castles. But this was the second city of Judah, the winter capital, and you can see right here the platform where the Judean palace was situated. The palace itself is no longer there, though you can see the foundations within that platform. There was a ramp going up the hillside right here to an outer gate. Then there was an inner gate right here and a market street that led like this. You can't see it anymore, but because it's all mud brick and deteriorated. And Don't pay any attention to this whole area right here. That's a big dump from the excavations. But there was the inner wall going along like this, an outer wall down here with the rampart in between. And there was then an Assyrian siege ramp that they put up right here. I'm going through all this detail because we're going to see this graphically presented on the walls of Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh, the whole scene. Presented on the wall, it's about 6-7 feet high, this bas-relief mural. And this is the viewpoint of that bas-relief, which we will see in a couple of slides. But another picture of Lachish viewed from the top, the plan, roadway, outer gate, inner gate, the palace platform right here with an area, an open area in front, storerooms along the side, and so on. The inner wall excavated in these locations right here. The outer wall easily visible on the surface, and the rampart, also called a glacis because it's icy. They use the French word. This is a picture of that slope up close. The inner wall, the thickness of the inner wall right here, it went all along the top, of course. The outer wall down here, you can still see some of the outer part of all you have to do is sweep that off. Here's an excavated portion of it right there, rampart in between. And the palace platform, the palace would have been yet up higher like this. So a very imposing structure at Lachish. Okay, I don't give you a picture of the actual bas-relief in Nineveh because you have to get so far back to see it that you wouldn't visualize it. This drawing is much better. We'll show some details from the original bas-relief, but I've marked in yellow are the activities of the defenders. In red are the activities of the besiegers. You can see that the wall is what we call an inset offset wall. All right. If I go back here, you see going along like this, then it comes out, goes along, goes in again, goes out. Okay. So Sennacherib's illustration is exactly what was there. It looks like he's doing this from a sketch somebody made at Lachish. You see the city gate right here. You see archers on top of the gate. They are throwing down torches, burning, flaming torches, rocks, and so on. The Assyrians also have their archers down here. They have slingers down here with here's the stone in the sling. Behind are even more slingers. Going up to the walls, this is the outer wall, this is the inner wall, or maybe even the palace wall, are on the siege ramp is wooden planking upon which are siege machines. Do you see this right here? One wheel, front wheel, a back wheel right here. Archers in front and in behind, and a large stone pick coming out. We'll see a larger depiction of that here in a little bit. But on each one of these things right here is a siege machine. You see one up here, another one here, another one there, another one right there going the other direction now. That's their way of dealing with perspective, I guess. But always at the top were these siege machines. The Israelite defenders are trying to set them on fire with the flaming torches. Okay, the defenders also have spears and lances. The besiegers are here impaling 3 captives on stakes, poles, while refugees stream out of the city gate. There are more refugees over here. Actually, this bas relief goes far to the right and far to the left too, but these are the central panels. Let's go to some of the specifics now. You see the city gate here with the Israelite archers, the flaming torches, and the rocks coming down. This is the siege machine right here with an archer in the top. And here's this pick coming out to loosen stones and make the wall collapse. There's also, because of the torches falling down, do you see this large ladle here pouring water out on the pick? The next picture is a drawing of this, combining several of these siege machines, the wheels down here. Here's this ladle, okay, and you see a big vat of water, and the guy is dipping the ladle in the water and then spraying it over. This is probably leather, so it could burn. Archers protecting. Here are the guys down in the bottom wielding the
Larry, you've frozen, at least for me. I don't know if you can do anything about that, but if you're talking now, we are not hearing you. I guess the Canadian weather has finally stepped in.
This was so fascinating, and of all places to cut out.
Yeah, exactly.
Loving this.
Yes, I'm sure you are. Well, we'll see if Larry can come back. I don't know. Maybe we discuss until he comes back.
Do you have his phone number?
I do have his phone number.
That may be
Let
the
me
best
call
one.
him. Yeah. You guys talk among yourselves while I phone Larry. No one's talking.
Okay, I think I'm with you again now.
Oh, good.
Somehow that got lost.
We were just saying how much we were enjoying it, and it had gotten at a kind of a crucial point in the battle here.
Yeah, we've got lots more.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this siege ramp was built so they could get their siege machines up there. Within the ramp, there were several interesting finds that were made. One was this four links of chain together. They wondered what this was for the longest time, and then they discovered another siege mural. There are almost 15 or 20 of these siege murals in the Assyrian palaces. And only one is the Israelite one. But you see a defender on the wall and a chain coming down. He's grabbed the battering ram right here, and they're pulling up on it so that the battering ram has no force against probably they're going against the gate over here. But he's pulling up. Meanwhile, there are two Assyrian soldiers down below with hooks trying to pull the battering ram back down. Here's a drawing of that, the defender with the chain here and the two Assyrian soldiers trying to pull it down. Also in this, you see sappers sapping the foundations of the walls so that they will collapse. Massive picture of the king. He's always pictured large. There were also slingers. These we did not see. They were to the left off the picture. The reason they were to the left off the picture is slingers could sling their stones farther than archers could shoot their arrows. At the end of 18 inches of sling, they can really go. Now, that's a sling stone held in my hand like this, a little larger than a baseball. And it weighs at least a pound. It's made of very hard limestone called chert. It's very heavy. I'd say it's about 1.2, 1.3 pounds. If David used a stone like that, and after all, he was searching for, quote, smooth stones that would fly straight, right? You make them round. If you look closely on this, you can see where it's been pecked so that it can be round. And it would fly true then, whereas if you just picked up a normal stone, they tend to curve when going through the air. And here, the stones up here, we say these are sling stones because of an ancient art like this. We find so many of them. At our site in Jordan, we found, 200 or 300 of them. We don't think all of them were sling stones. They were probably used secondarily or even primarily as pounding stones, to work with leather or something like that. But they could also be used as sling stones, most assuredly. And slingers were a big part of the Assyrian army. Another thing they found in the siege ramp were these metal crescents. They wondered what they were for the longest time until they started to study this this impaling scene. And here this seems to be abdominal impaling. You see they're setting up a pole and it's going up through the abdomen of this guy. But if you look at the Assyrian soldiers, you see that on top of their helmets, there's this crescent-like thing right here. You see that on many artworks of Assyrian soldiers. We'll see more later too, but those were probably the crests, the helmet crests found on them. This impaling was nasty stuff, folks. We'll see another picture of a different way of doing it. It's probably the gallows that Haman was building for Mordecai in the book of Esther. Okay, a little bit about what the Assyrians did to people. And they did them in public, just like this one. It's right outside the city. See one of the siege ramps going up here, so that all the defenders on the city wall could see what was happening and get, they get fear and all that sort of stuff. And here's the city. This is not Lachish. This is another city. But you see the defenders on the wall looking out, while this guy, and he doesn't look very much in pain, but they are dismembering him. Okay, here's hands and feet surrounding, a couple of feet down here, a couple of hands. And then they are impaling them. This looks like it's anal impaling to me. But these were not nice people. Other things that they did, and I include a drawing here instead of the original because the original is kind of difficult to see, but there's quartering going on, and then there's scarification too, cutting up on the back and on the front, holding them by the ears and pulling out their tongue. This is just by hand pulling out the tongue. So there's a reason to fear these guys. It's not the reason for Jonah fearing the Assyrians or fearing Nineveh, because if you go to Nineveh itself, they aren't going to do that to people. This is only for rebels and so on. Jonah didn't want to go there because if he went there and converted them, they would come and, they would destroy Samaria. So he didn't want to be a betrayer or a treasonous kind of person. The soldiers would come before the commanding officer. You see the crest again here. And they would bring the severed heads of the people they had killed. And in that way, they could be very accurate about their kills. And they could be incorporated by scribes. Here a eunuch and here another soldier or record keeper. And then after the battle, of course, this is not from Sennacherib's palace. This is actually from the palace of Ashurbanipal, who was about a century later than Sennacherib. But they would have a feast, of course. There are several interesting things about this feast. The king reclining on his high couch here with the queen on a throne facing him. Behind them both are two eunuchs with keep off the bugs or provide moving air or something like that. But they're sitting under a grape arbor here. Could be the Napa Valley. And here they are, they're bringing gifts and other things here. There's a eunuch who's playing a harp over here. So music, food, feasting. It's an idyllic scene with birds in the trees and so on. But right here, with a ring in his mouth or nose, holding up the severed head of one of the kings that Ashurbanipal has defeated. There you go. Delightful people. Okay, I want to come back to Lachish now. What did the Israelites look like? I know one of my favorite books growing up, of course, series of books was the Bible stories, I must admit. And you people there with having the Maxwells around, at least for a while. Malcolm was there, I think. The drawings, the paintings in the Bible stories were all 19th century fashion of local villagers, not ancient ones. Well, here are real ancient Israelites from 701 BC. You can see the women up here, women, adults, prepubescent girls, and young children on the cart here. But the women and older girls all had ankle-length dresses, maybe decoration along the bottom. They seem to be carrying things for making thread. I can't think of the term right now, because women always do two things at once, at least. Then a veil over their heads and their backs, leaving their arms free so they can work and be active. Spindles, that's what I was trying to think of, spindles for making wool or yarn or any kind of yarn. The men seem to have had round hats with ear flaps, maybe wore t-shirts. If this line across the upper arm, the biceps, is any indication, there may be one right, clicking as I go here. Maybe one right there as well. Then they have a kind of kilt, a short kilt with a waistband decorated and a sash coming down. So that's what the men seem to have worn as well. This seems to have been a little girl, maybe a little boy right here. And the oxen, the cattle, notice how their ribs are showing from starvation. I visited Lachish while the excavations were going on in 1978, run by the University of Tel Aviv University. The author was David Usishkin, and he's written a recent book for lay people on Lachish. But this is Denise, my wife. The original destruction of 701 started here and went to below where she's standing. You can see the bricks all fallen from the wall, in order here, and burnt. Most bricks were sun-dried bricks, and so they weren't very hard, but these have been hardened like they're in an oven. The limestone has turned to actual lime here by the fire. This is a very hot, buried underground fire. We've found a similar fire from the time of the judges, actually, at our site in Jordan. So this was the destruction of Lachish made by Sennacherib. After that destruction, I should say in that destruction were found many Israelite skeletons. One place, there was a mass grave of a couple hundred people just thrown into a large pit. And one of the skulls shows signs of trepanation. Probably some problem underneath. So they saw a hole and let the pressure out. This shows actually signs of healing after such a thing. But of course, most people would not survive that sort of operation. Okay, Lachish has been destroyed. All the cities have been destroyed. Then the strategy is to go towards Jerusalem, well fortified in the hills, the highlands, difficult to attack. So you get rid of everything else first and then go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem would have been filled with refugees again, a teeming place, bordering on starvation. Here's what Sennacherib threatened. After Lachish was destroyed, he sent a messenger up to Jerusalem. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, King Sennacherib of Assyria came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and captured them. The king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh, okay, that's his messenger, from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. He stood by the conduit of the upper pool. The upper pool would be that one where the spring was, okay, on the highway to the Fuller's Field. The highway would have run at the base of the Kidron Valley. The Rabshakeh said to them, say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria. Oh, and he had many other titles too. On what do you base this confidence of yours? But if you say to me, we rely on Yahweh our God. Sounds like Isaiah, doesn't it? Is it not he, Yahweh, whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed? Saying to Judah and Jerusalem, Hezekiah was a reformer, right? He wanted people to worship only in Jerusalem, so he destroyed everything else. So the Rabshakeh is saying, these are terrible things Hezekiah has done. He's torn down your altars, your local churches, right? And only wanted you to go to the conference office for this. So Yahweh said to me, Yahweh has given him the authority, the king, King Sennacherib, go up against this land and destroy it. Well, this is what Jeremiah said when Babylon was conquering it, right? You've been so wicked. God wanted Babylon to come. Then these people said to the Rabshakeh, please speak to your servants in Aramaic. Aramaic was the international language of the Assyrian Empire. But the people in Judah would not have understood it, but the courtiers and so on would have. So they said, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah within the hearing of the people who are on the wall. Well, that's exactly what he wanted to do, right? He wanted them to hear what the threat was. But the Rabshakeh said, has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the people sitting on the wall who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and drink their own urine? That's what a siege brought about. Starvation, famine, all that. Okay, that's what the claim of the Rabshakeh is. Now, when Sennacherib, Sennacherib actually claims to have defeated Hezekiah in Jerusalem, and he wrote this cuneiform inscription called the Sennacherib Prism, which is now in the British Museum. But it is an account of several of his victories, but one of which is the victory at Jerusalem. And I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to summarize it here. Sennacherib besieged and destroyed 46, or he claims to have besieged and destroyed 46 Judean cities. That would have been most of them. Then he besieged Jerusalem, and this is a quote now, famous quote, shut up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage, the siege. He claims Hezekiah ultimately bought him off with a large amount of antimony, which is a kind of metal, jewels, temple furnishings, ivory inlaid furniture, like the ivory we saw earlier of the cherub and the woman at the window, several of his own daughters, women from the harem, and male and female singers, hundreds of male and female singers, by the way. Apparently the Judeans were known for their music. The Bible says nothing about this, that Hezekiah had to pay a large tribute. Assyrian wrath could be physically very violent, as the bas-reliefs from Nineveh show, and the tribute to avoid it was severe. It looks like, according to Sennacherib, Hezekiah bought him off. But what does Sennacherib say? He says nothing about what the Bible claims in 2 Kings 19:35. Instead, in 2 Kings 19:35, It says, that very night, the angel of Yahweh set out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when morning dawned, they were all dead bodies. Uh, so Hezekiah and Judah claims victory. Sennacherib claims victory. And this has been a debate among archaeologists and ancient historians for quite a while. Are they both sort of propagandizing, or what's going on? Though costly, I mean, all the Judean cities, virtually all, were destroyed. This is a serious problem. Though costly, Hezekiah seems to have been ultimately victorious. If he had not been, I don't know if we would have had the holy city we still know today and love to visit. And this being, of course, quintessentially, this view being quintessentially the holy city of Jerusalem today, the Dome of the Rock with its beautiful Izmir blue tiles, the golden dome put on by King Hussein of Jordan, by the way, but is roughly the spot of the ancient Israelite temple. Okay, I'm afraid I've given you a lot of stuff, but that's how archaeologists look at the book of Isaiah.
Okay, well, I know people have things to say, and please either raise your hand or unmute yourselves if you wish to comment. And I see that Shireen has raised her hand. Larry, you need to unshare your screen, I think, at this point.
Hi, good morning.
I can do it.
Larry, can you go back to your screen that had the city of David?
Okay, well, I'm going to have to, I did this wrong. I'm going
Okay,
to have
if
to
it's
log
difficult-
back in.
Well, okay, but we can still see the slides.
This is what I did before. It won't take long at all.
We can see the slides. We can still
Yes.
see the Dome
You
of the
do?
Rock. We see the Dome of the Rock right now.
Oh, okay. Let's see, no, PowerPoint. Okay, yeah, you see a small one there? Okay, go back to which one?
The city of David?
Okay. This one?
No, the first ones.
This one.
Yes, well, let's see. The one before that. Yes, that's it. That's it. Okay, I just want to say
It went
something
away.
about that.
Go back to the one with the red lines.
Yeah, you just had it.
There.
Right, that one. Okay, I remember years ago, my first time when I went to Israel, I had gone with a Jewish archaeologist. He had worked with me at the public colleges. And he showed me the Hezekiah's tunnel, which was the most amazing experience in Israel. And I have to say that I was kind of surprised because there was this undercurrent conversation among some of the archaeologists. He was very good friends with William Dever, who I got to meet and sat in some of his classes. But the undercurrent conversation was that the Western Wall that they say is the wall of the temple is not really the wall of the temple. The Western Wall was really the wall of the Roman Empire. And that the temple was really in the city of David. It was not where the Dome of the Rock is. And I remember hearing that and just, thinking all about it and, went and did my own research in a couple of books. And, there is a major argument between exactly where the temple resides today. The popular scholarship says, oh, it's up on the Temple Mount, but there are many archaeologists who say it's not, and they can prove that it's not because of where the Hezekiah's tunnel is and where the pool was situated and, just basically the whole temple area. It is not where it says it is today. Have you done any research on that? Larry,
I've read a lot about Jerusalem. I've lived in Jerusalem for a total of 2 years, 1 year straight through. Okay, several things. This is you're right. The walls around the temple platform and the temple that we see today, the temple platform, not this building, not that building, not the other small buildings around, but the area is Roman. It's Herod the Great.
yes,
Okay, and the stones of the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall right here, are the stones of Herod the Great.
yes,
Some of the stones at this corner are over 60 feet long. Okay, and in a
yes,
tunnel going underneath here, there's one that's 70 feet, 60 feet long, and 15 feet high and 15 feet thick. It's one stone. It's huge. They got it from a quarry off here to the northwest, off the picture. And brought them. It was always downhill, and just swerved in and built them up as they didn't lift the stones at all. They just deposited them. Okay, so you're right about that. The city of David, this was the Jebusite city as well
right,
that David conquered. It was full with people and houses. So when David conquered it, he built his city, his palace area called Ophel in the Bible. It had to be north of the city. There was no place south. It just goes down to the valley here. You don't want to build in the valley. You have no
right,
protection. So
right.
the north was the only place they could go. So they probably built their palaces up here. And one archaeologist in the recent last decade or so has claimed to have found the Davidic palace up here.
Yes,
And
yes, I read that.
there's some good reason for it. There's some detractors, of course.
hmm
You mentioned William Dever. Is that Bill Dever?
Yes,
Okay, he's a very good friend of many of ours too. Um, uh, for many years, we've been friends with Bill for about 50 years. Larry Garrity and
came
myself.
to Napa. He came to
I'm
Napa
sorry?
last year. He was
Oh,
in
he was?
Napa last year, and I
Ah,
attended some of his
okay.
meetings.
Yeah, he's extremely erudite.
Yes.
Actually, he was a child evangelist for a very conservative Christian evangelical group when he was young.
Mm,
It's a very interesting story. But I know of very few. Some archaeologists say this is not the site of the temple, but
yes.
probably about 95% of them say it most likely is.
Yes.
It's the only place. The palace area would have been here. The temple area had to be in this region here. It wasn't as big as this, okay?
hmm
It seems to have been smaller, but it has to be in this region here.
Okay,
And it's the highest. You go up to the temple in the Bible all over, all throughout the Bible.
Yes.
It's the best
very,
I
Thank
can
you.
okay, Willie, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you so much for this this presentation. It was really interesting. I teach history here at PUC, and my specialty is history of technology. So I loved your descriptions of
Oh, yeah.
the way that people lived. I do modern technology, but way that people lived, that warfare was really fascinating. So thank you for that. My question, and this is just a small little question, is a little more than a year ago, we were doing Ezra and Nehemiah in Sabbath school, and you were showing the alignments of the different walls of Jerusalem. I'm just curious where Nehemiah's wall was.
right through here. Excavations done by the Israelis in the 1970s and 80s on this slope above the spring. This is where the spring is, and they dug above it. Actually, this is one of the things, well, not only the Israelis, but the British, part of the outer wall of Jerusalem, and then the slope going up to the inner wall. They think the Persian wall would have been something like this right here, extending like that. Okay. So, and it would have gone around this area too. It would have not included the Mishnah, which we don't see off to the left of this picture, that
Okay.
refugee camp surrounded by the broad wall. But it would have been the Jerusalem, post-exilic Jerusalem would have been just probably the city of David, with a small version of the temple.
Okay, so smaller than Hezekiah's city by a lot.
Yes, so especially after he built the Mishnah.
Mhm.
Okay, but not the city he inherited never necessarily. That
Okay.
would have been the city of David.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Are there any? It's a little past when we usually go. It's 11:16 or something. I think my clock disappeared. 11:18. And if there are no more comments, oh, Vicky. Okay, and I think we'll let Vicky probably have the last comment.
Well, this is sort of a combination of a historical question and maybe a theological one at the same time.
Good.
And that is, I remember being very surprised when I found out, I grew up with Uncle Arthur's Bible stories too. And the whole story of the miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from Sennacherib, and, the angel of the Lord, killing the whole army, overnight. And then when I learned about the fact that there had been over 40 walled cities already destroyed, plus a 3-year siege of Lachish, I'm thinking, well, why would God protect Jerusalem so dramatically and let the rest of the country just, fall before the Assyrians? So that was one question. And now I remember also, maybe you can correct this, but years ago, I think it was back when Louis Normington was teaching a Sabbath school class, where he was talking about the fact that there was at least 2 secular references to that destruction of Sennacherib's army. And one of them, they did not cite the angel of the Lord killing them. One of them said that they had been overrun by rats or rodents that had chewed up the leather links in their armor and their weapons and made them impossible to use. And I think the other source said something to the effect that they had contracted a plague and had died of that, which would not be mutually exclusive from being overrun with rats or rodents. Anyway, I just wondered if you had anything to expand on for that or correct my memory.
It would also not be mutually exclusive if the angel of the Lord would have brought rats or mice,
Oh, sure.
as some say, or a plague, or all of them. I think the rats or mice, I heard it as mice, but I think that source is Josephus, who was the Jewish historian from the 1st century AD. And most people do not know where he got that. It's not biblical. And it would have been, of course, if it's Josephus, written down anyway, hundreds of years later. Some people describe it as the Egyptian army, a Cushite army coming up from Egypt, led by Taharka, and fighting with the Assyrians. And that I think the Bible does talk about a little bit. But there's some confusion about the exact date. Both of your questions I have to answer with that nobody really knows.
Yeah.
Why did God allow this? Why did God allow the Holocaust? I mean, I have hundreds of questions I'm going to tickle Abraham's bosom with when I have it available to me. But I have a lot of questions. One of them is, frankly, I'm going to state this boldly, what seems to me to be the perfidy of the deity. We cannot control him. Job tried, he could not. God is going to be God. I mean, he's going to decide something, who can explain him? Actually, I like to think of God as an it, but it's hard to say that, isn't it? Hebrew only has 2 genders, not a neuter gender. So it's got to be a he or a she for them anyway, and we have inherited that. So no, I can't give you any comfort on that. I asked the same question many, many times and in many, many different ways.
Well, I think we're going to end on that note.
That's a rather negative way to end.
Well, we know that God is mysterious and we
Yeah,
have many
that's
questions.
what it is.
Right?
And he's sovereign.
Yes. Before I ask Larry to give us a benediction, I will let you all know that next week Ernie Bursty will be with us again. You may recall he's a good close reader of scripture, and he'll be looking at the book of Philemon with us, and I'll be sending out some readings, and currently one, including one in Greek for those of you who read Greek. I think we have at least 2 people, perhaps. Maybe more, 3. So we always really learn from Ernie, so we're looking forward to that. Okay, Larry, would you please, we thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us, and please give us a benediction.
Dear Lord, for that greatest of all archaeological preserved finds, the Bible, we praise you and give you thanks. Amen.
Amen. Okay, I am going to,
Can you unshare the screen?
yeah, I'm going to see if I can do that. Here we go. I'm unsharing. Feel free to unmute yourselves and say goodbye.
Mhm.
I am not a cat.
Thank you.
But I have pets.
Thanks.
You're
Bye,
not a
everybody.
cat, but you're covered with cats.
Exactly.
Take care, Larry.
You bet.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's a beautiful day. I'm sure I'll see some of you in the forest. And have a good week, everyone. Larry, we wish you slightly warmer weather, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not going out today,
No. Very careful there.
but this next week it's supposed to get up to freezing or thawing, whichever one you want to say.
Okay, good. Well, I wish that for you. And thank
All
you.
the best to everyone.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.